The upper traps are not only responsible for very big deadlifts, but they're also responsible for making you look very big. A lot of men have androgen receptors in the upper traps. They're also very good for combat. They keep your neck stable. They act like bicycle shocks for athletes. If you get hit in the head, you'll notice if you have a thick neck and thick traps, it actually stops your head from bouncing as much. Wrestlers have really big traps. There's a lot of reasons why you want big traps. So today I'm going to tell you the way to get big traps. And this is not going to be science-based, no meta-analyses. I'm going to oversimplify this, but I'm going to go into enough detail so that you walk away from this longer video really understanding how to get a big upper back. So there's 3 types of trap training. People will say there's 2 types. There's 3 types if you break it down a little bit further. There's indirect compound training. Then we're going to talk about direct compound training. Then we're going to talk about direct isolation training, because there are a couple exercises that will isolate the traps, which are not necessary for the majority. But if you're somebody who just has goals of having an unbelievably big upper back, whether your deadlift is suffering because it's small or because you just want to look really intimidating, or again, maybe you're a combat athlete, or maybe like you just want to be a more capable man and you think traps make you look more intimidating. Totally fine, we'll talk about that. So indirect compound training there's really 4 examples. There's the conventional deadlift, the Romanian deadlift, anything with a Zercher, and farmer's walks. Now, the way you should treat these exercises are not as trap exercises because it's indirect training. But what you should also know is the thing with indirect training is it is going to be most of your trap growth, assuming you lift like a power lifter or even like a power builder. If you're a bodybuilder who does a lot of compound stuff, a lot of powerlifters who might not do a lot of the training we're going to talk about, which is the direct compound training, which is going to be stuff like rows and chin-ups. You should do rows and chin-ups, but a majority of your trap gains is just going to come up from lifting heavy stuff. This is just the thing that everybody knows. If you have a really heavy deadlift, you're most likely not going to have underdeveloped traps. It's really rare that you see a powerlifter with a small upper back. Even if you look at women who, they're probably also doing a lot of rows. They're probably doing a lot of chin-ups as well, which kind of contributes to the upper back. But I don't really think chin-ups build traps the way that heavy rows and heavy pulls do, which we're going to talk about. But women have less androgen receptors than men, so you would think that their traps wouldn't pop as much. But I've seen women, natural lifting women, that have very impressive upper backs, and the majority of them, they're not the figure competitors, they're not doing the bodybuilding isolation stuff, they just have really impressive pulls. They have really impressive deadlifts, they have really impressive RDLs, and they have a really impressive yoke. And I bring them up because women tend to have smaller upper bodies, obviously for biological reasons, so the fact that there are women out there with bigger traps than some gym rat men, it's because those men don't pull heavy. They also probably don't pull at all because deadlifts are cool, but they don't lift heavy weights. And heavy weights causes trap gains. That's just the way it is. They're a muscle that responds to heavy isometric loading. So these 4 exercises are something you want to include. Now, as far as rep ranges for these exercises, with the deadlift, I would say anything from 1 to 10 reps. And the reason I would say that is, again, there's a lot of power lifters that they do a lot of heavy singles and doubles, and they have huge traps. There are powerlifters who, for long periods of time, will just do a bunch of singles. That's hypertrophic, because even if you're not doing a max effort single, which you shouldn't do constantly, but if you're doing a single at like 90%, still heavy, still going to get a lot of isometric loading on the traps, still going to contribute to muscle growth, especially if you're doing repeating singles across. So if you did, 4x1 or 5x1, to say that that's not going to cause muscle growth is dumb. It's just ignorant. I don't know why people think sets of 1. Well, it falls out of the hypertrophy range. Whatever. Would I do sets of 1 specifically to grow my traps? No, that's asinine. But this just proves that there's a gradient to things. As far as RDLs, I would say anything from 3 to 8 reps. I find that when people do RDLs above 8 reps, it starts to get really fatiguing. Not from the point where it's unrecoverable, because lighter RDLs are going to recover you easily, but even if you have good cardio, your lower back and your bracing might kind of crap out when you're trying to maintain that rigid posture for a set of like 10 or 12. Now, I'm not saying that a set of 12 RDLs isn't going to build muscle. It's also less conducive to strength, and strength usually means bigger muscles unless you're a lightweight lifter who's very neurologically adept. And the reason I say sets of 3 is because I don't see the issue with that. Honestly, RDLs are relatively easy-ish to recover from, even when you get really strong. Because focusing on the eccentric, you're not going to be heaving that much weight, even if you do it for triples. Now, the bread and butter of RDLs are going to be sets of 5, right? Maybe 5s, but not because I'm a Ripito guy, but it just makes sense. I love sets of 5 for RDLs. I think more people should do it. You could do sets of 6, sets of 7, but I wouldn't go above 8. Zercher stuff, it's not stuff that you have to do, but there is a lot of strong men out there, and I think strong men are awesome. I really do. I think they're very cool. And you can't deny that all the people doing the funky, odd lifts have big upper backs. When it comes to Zercher training, same thing as an RDL. I feel like if you do Zerchers for really high reps, you're going to struggle to maintain that rigid posture. The form might go out the window, especially because it's an awkward exercise. And for farmers carries, obviously these aren't reps, right? So that's just as long as you can manage it. I mean, farmers carries were designed to do that, especially as men. We're designed genetically to hunt stuff and then bring it back to our tribe. It's just the way, again, ancient DNA. For direct trap training, I'm going to keep this very broad and concise because somehow I've already talked at you for 7 minutes. I'm just going to put rows because there are so many different types of rows. There's high rows, there's cheat rows, or like a Yates row, there are machine rows, there are Pendlay rows, there's the traditional barbell row where you take it out of the rack. There's so many different ways to pull, which is a funny thing to take out of context. There are actually a lot of different ways to pull, but we're not going to talk about that. But honestly, when it comes to rows, any sort of row, what you must remember is the higher your back angle, the more trap it's going to be, which makes sense because a shrug is kind of like a row. Not really, but you think about it. You start here, this is a row, and if you're upright, that's a shrug, right? You're doing a shrug at that point. So the more vertical the back, the more trap-focused hypertrophy you're going to get. So the more direct you want to be, the higher the back. But if you just want overall back development with some trap growth sprinkled in there, I'm a really big fan of the dead stop row from the floor. I like Pendlay rows for powerlifters, but if you purely want hypertrophy and you don't want to do pause reps, you want to keep time under tension, whatever, because yes, that is a thing. People say that's bro science. It's not bro science. Spato presses are what made my pecs and not pecs, because I was very shoulder dominant for a long time. I still kind of am. But if you want to do, rows from a hang position where you're doing that, I like that as well. What I prefer about Pendlay rows is they allow you to get more explosive reps, and they also allow you to work with heavier weights, which allows you to milk the eccentric, which traps really respond to. So the reason I don't like doing rows out of the rack from a hang position is, again, even if you have a big strong core, if you already did deadlifts or you already did bench press and your body's going to get fatigued the stronger you get, taking heavy rows out of the rack and doing it from a hang and having to hold that brace, for some of you it's good and you need that work, but for some of you who are ultra strong, it's actually easier to do something heavier off the floor and let it hit the ground each time. It'll also allow you to overload the traps. Now, as far as the rep range, again, triples are fine. I'll put a little question mark there. But I like rows for sets of 5 to actually 12. And the reason I say 12 is because, again, if you're doing rows off the floor, you're not really going to have the issue of maintaining the brace or lower back fatigue because you're pulling from a dead stop. There's also machine rows that can be done for sets of 12, so I like that. The third type of trap training is direct isolation work, where you're really isolating the traps. And after this, we're not just talking about exercises, we're going to talk about frequency, we're going to talk about how many sets you might want to do, and we're also going to talk about how to specialize and how to maintain your traps, although Trap maintenance is easy, actually. But again, if you really wanted to specialize your traps, we'll give a little segment to that at the end. So there's three types of direct isolation training. There's the power shrug, the hang shrug, and the Zercher shrug. So a power shrug is the starting strength, kind of their version of doing the shrug, which is you do it from a dead stop inside the rack, and you shrug up like this, and you go back down. The way they teach it is like you want to, almost like you're doing a clean, but the weight's too heavy, so you just stop at the shrug. Power shrugs are great because, again, I like the idea of you want to be able to use as much weight through an effective range of motion as you can. It also, the power shrug teaches you to neurologically get used to really heavy stuff in your hands. Even if you're using straps, it might tax your grip a little because straps aren't a total cheat code. You know, if you have tiny little itty bitty forearms and I strap you up to 400 pounds, you're still not going to be able to hold it. You know, obviously, straps are a massive game changer when it comes to alleviating grip need. But, anyways, hang shrugs are also pretty cool because when you're constantly holding onto the bar, you're going to notice that your traps get very fatigued, which is good because obviously you're trying to fatigue the muscle. And it's not as potentially draining on your system because if you're doing shrugs from a hang position where you walk out of the rack and do shrugs like that, you're going to be using lower poundages. I know I just said higher poundages are good, but there's a time and a place for both. So if you really want to overload the traps, especially if you're a power lifter, maybe you're very not good at lockout, power shrugs are a better alternative, but hang shrugs is just a variation. Zercher shrugs are, I love them. There's really nothing bad about them. They just don't, from a movement pattern perspective, quite carry over to a deadlift as well because there is no instance in powerlifting or even Olympic lifting in which you need to cradle the weight here. I would assume that there are some sort of strongman events where they do Zercher stuff. The amount of volume you need for your upper back is going to be dependent on the way that you train. So the amount of indirect sets, so this is deadlifts, this is RDLs, any sort of heavy hip hinge movements, maybe sumo, but not really because it's less upper back dominant. It's really more quad focused, etc. But if you were to do, again, only deadlifts, if you were to not do rows, which you should do rows, but there are a lot of guys who they don't do barbell rows anymore because they feel like it's too fatiguing. And there's a lot of guys out there who run a split where it's really just deadlifts, RDLs, and chin-ups. So if you're that kind of guy, you probably need anywhere from 4 to 8 sets a week. So what this looks like is on Monday, say you do 1 set of deadlift and 2 sets of stiff-legged deadlifts. That's 3 sets. And then another part of the week, you do 3 sets of RDLs. So 3 plus 3 equals 6. Therefore, you fall in the middle of that. If you want to specialize your traps, you should be doing 9 to 12 sets of heavy pulling. And that sounds like overkill. That's because it is. This is not meant to be maintainable. This, like 10 sets of deadlifts a week or 10 sets of RDLs a week, is specifically for somebody who is desensitized to higher volumes, desensitized to higher frequencies, and is not planning to run this for a long period of time. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to milk out a lot of stimulus and a lot of growth in a small period of time. That's what specialization is. So if you were to do, something crazy like 5 sets of deadlifts one day and then 5 sets of RDLs another day and do 10 sets, your squat volume is probably going to be very, very low. You're probably going to be doing 4 to 6 sets of squats a week. I wouldn't specialize your trap training by only deadlifting. That's a horrible idea. For direct training, most of you are going to be doing stuff like deadlifts and RDLs, so technically you could just do rows twice a week. I wouldn't do that. I think you should deadlift. So if you're someone like me who would never do what I just said, which is heavy pulling twice a week, I highly recommend that. I mean, you could deadlift twice a week, like if you were doing heavy light. So, I could get away with doing a higher effort deadlift and then doing, RDLs for sets of 8. That's something I'm actually probably going to program soon next cycle. But what I think is a great way to do this would be a lower volume intensity day, one hard set of deadlifts, one back off set of stiff legged deadlifts. You could do more volume on this day. Depends on you. I don't do well with a lot of deadlifts. I do very well with one set of deadlifts. That works for me. There's a lot of lifters who do it like that. And then on a different day, you could do a higher volume. You could do 5 sets of Pendlay rows, which would give you 7 sets in total. If you were to specialize, so just remember, like I said, 4 to 8 sets of heavy pulling is going to be the bread and butter for 99.999% of you. If you are a world champion deadlifter, 2 sets might be plenty. You might actually be able to grow a little bit off of that because those 2 sets are going to be so astronomically heavy and hypertrophy inducing because you're redonkulously strong, like you're pulling 800, 900, right? Whatever. Or on the other side of the spectrum, you're not very strong and you could get away with pulling more often, but 4 to 8 sets is great for most of you. However, we were talking a little bit about specialization. But if I was to specialize the upper back, which is tempting because my shoulders are wide and hyper-specialize the traps, first thing I would do is higher frequency. Pulling 4 times a week is not ideal unless you're a Soviet lifter or you're doing some crazy undulating periodization. I would do 3 times a week, kind of like I just talked about. So I think this is perfect. If you wanted massive yokes for traps, this is what I would do. I would do one day that's deadlift focused. So it could be conventional, it could be RDLs, it could be Zercher deadlifts if you're a strongman doing strongman things. And then on a second day, I would do, let's say, like I said, 5 sets of rows. And then, kind of not to repeat myself, but you could do either shrugs or farmer's walks, and you could do that for 2 to 4 sets. If you did really high volume pulling like this, and you're eating your protein, you're eating your carbs, you're eating your fats, you're eating your testosterone boosting micronutrients like boron and zinc, and you're hydrated, and you're eating your creatine, and you pull with that. Now, don't go to failure because you have to train intelligently, right? I like to do the 80s style where you plan your PRs in advance and you cycle back and forth. But if you think you're going to do all this pulling and not walk away with traps that are at least an inch thicker, if you did this for 2 to 3 months and you don't think you're going to put an inch or 2 on your traps, you're just, because that's a lot. That's a lot of work. The cost of specialization is when you are trying to get really good at one thing, another thing, best case scenario, gets a little bit better. Second best case scenario stays the same, which is going to be true for the majority of you. Or worse, if you don't know what you're doing, you detrain. So if you hyper specialize your traps by doing a lot of pulling and you're not making sure that you're recovering enough to do your squat workout because you're always pulling heavy, so your hamstrings are taxed, your lats are taxed, your abs are taxed, and you're like, I could, take it easy on my squats, and your quads get smaller. Now what are you going to do? Do the opposite? Oh, now I got to specialize my quads. So if you're going to do something like that, know what you're doing. Be intelligent when you do it. But I've been classic lifting until 14 days. I have a typo in my name because I did it too fast. It's classic lifting F. Whatever. But I hope this taught you a lot. This was a very long yap session. But I like to talk about this.